Can you believe it? We're already almost done. Well, this is the last unit. We already reviewed units 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and this is number 7 out of 7 for this year's AP test. Today, I'm going to be going over the first 2/3 or so of unit. So unit 7 used to be units 8 and 11, so that's what is here. Still the remnants of the old style. I'm going to be going over about 2/3 of unit 8 because when distance learning started, that's where we were. So I already have videos finishing out 8 and doing all of 10. So I'm going to tack those on to Classroom, and you'll see me with longer hair before I cut it talking about that. So, and then you'll have a quiz like normal, and that leaves us with, I think, 2 more days for seniors and like an additional week for juniors. But for the last 2 days with everybody, we're going to be reviewing free response questions because that's literally all this AP test is this year. So we'll be looking at previous free response questions. I'll be having you write free response questions. I'll be having you grade your own free response questions based on their rubric, and I'll show you examples. It'll be a whole thing. It'll be really good. Use some strategies for writing free response questions so that we'll all pass the AP test, get college credit and all that good stuff. So let's just get right into it. If you go to the A.R. Genheimer website, drop down Motivation, Emotion, Personality, or argenheimer.com/MEP, Motivation, Emotion, Personality. Then here's all the stuff, 2 Quizlets, 2 terms, and the terms, teacher terms. I figure, why not? This is my cheat sheet that I use during class. Let's just use that because it already kind of has the definitions written out. I figure why have a blank term sheet when you can have a term sheet already with my little cheat sheet on it. So that's what we're going to do. I think, let's see, we need to go to, I think, about feel good, do good. Somewhere in here is where we pick up in the other videos. So we'll walk through all the terms. But this motivation and emotion. Starts off with motivation. Motivation is just anything that drives you or energizes you, gives you the motivation to do something. And that can be, they use the analogy carrots and sticks. Carrots are some sort of an incentive to make you do something, like a prize if you complete something, a reward. And then sticks are a punishment if you don't do something. The corporate world uses carrots and sticks. Like you can punish your workers for not working hard enough, or you can reward them and give them a bonus. Carrots and sticks, motivation. Instinct is, animals have instincts, humans also have instincts. When we're in class we talk about this, but it's just something that you don't even have to learn. You just, like, you're hardwired biologically to understand it. So birds have like a sort of a flying instinct. Mama doesn't actually teach them to fly, just kind of pushes them off the nest, and they sort of do a little bit of that, and then they fail and they fall slowly and don't hurt themselves too much, but they have like a flapping instinct. You can think of what humans have. We have like a crying instinct. You pop out and you immediately start crying. Drive reduction theory says, it's one theory that partially explains motivation, that says the reason we do things is to reduce the amount of physiological arousal that we feel. Negative arousal. For instance, if we're hungry, we are in a state of negative arousal where we are physiologically hungry, and then we eat to reduce that arousal and get the next term, homeostasis, which is a non-aroused state. So homeostasis, we feel just normal. And if we are hungry or in pain or whatever, that would be an aroused state. And according to drive reduction theory, the reason you do things is to reduce that state of arousal. Now, there's a lot of counterexamples to drive reduction theory, like you can say, well, then why do you watch scary movies, or why do you go on roller coasters? Because in those senses, you're actually paying money to artificially increase your aroused state by scaring yourself or making your heartbeat increase, that kind of thing. So it is one theory that kind of oversimplifies why some of explains our motivation. Incentive is, of the carrots and sticks, it's the carrot. Incentive is a positive motivator for behavior. Abraham Maslow came up with this little triangle. He was a humanist psychologist. It's the hierarchy of needs. Let me see if I can So yeah, I could just make it bigger maybe. Does that work? Hey, that kind of works. Great. Made it ugly. That's okay. So Maslow came up with this hierarchy of needs. It's written different ways depending on which one you look at, but this is the one we have. And it is 5 steps, and it is kind of, there's actually some memes you may have seen that are like the coronavirus hierarchy of needs, and then it'll have like internet on the bottom or something like that. But it is on the bottom levels are the most basic needs, where you basically have to satisfy the lower levels to climb the ladder of more advanced needs. We'll walk through it. Physiological is the bottom, and that's stuff that if you don't have it soon, you will literally die. Now, you might notice something kind of funny on the physiological, and that might be, at least in his original version, some of the versions don't have it, but sex is in the physiological needs, which sounds like a funny thing, like if you don't have it, you will literally die. But more what he was talking about there was like the human race for reproduction. If humans stop reproducing, human race will die. I still think it's kind of a silly thing to have on the bottom rung, but most of it makes sense. Breathing, yeah, you're going to die real soon if you don't breathe. Food, water, sleep. Cool. After you satisfy those things, then you can start worrying about your health. Because if you don't have food, you don't even care if you're not healthy. You just want food. And then you start worrying about these things. And having employment and having like housing. Very important things. Once you satisfy those two, which hopefully both of you, everyone listening to this video, has satisfied at least the bottom two, and you're probably on one of the next two. Then the third one is love and belonging, and that is seeing that you have like a secure social circle, that you feel loved and secure emotionally. And if you satisfy that, according to Maslow, then you can move on to esteem, and that's feeling competent in what you do. So if you're a student, which if you're listening to this, you probably are, you feel like you are a good student, and you feel like your work is quality work. Or for me as a teacher, I feel like I'm a good teacher and that I am appreciated, all that kind of thing. That I have respect of my peers or of your other students. At the top is self-actualization, which Maslow said was kind of the goal of life. Ironically, and kind of paradoxically, he said it's also not possible to achieve, but it is realizing the full version of yourself, becoming the best version of you that you can possibly be. He did give examples of some people that were self-actualized, very few, but and they're the stereotypical people like Mother Teresa, Einstein, people like that he said were possibly self-actualized. Let me make this smaller again. Glucose is the sugar that regulates your hunger. When it's low, we feel hungry, and when it is sufficient, we don't feel hungry. Set point is kind of like the weight that your body likes to be at. I have it written in here, which I read from somewhere else. Your body's weight thermostat. It's like some people are just thin by nature, and some people are bigger by nature. And if you diet or if you eat a lot, it's just kind of, it's your body's natural default weight point. Sex hormones. Estrogen is the female sex hormone. Testosterone, male sex hormone. Testosterone is what makes you, I talked about this in another video, but testosterone makes you grow facial hair and makes your voice low. Builds muscle, which actually steroids are all basically synthetic versions of testosterone. And then estrogen is the female sex hormone, creates the female secondary sex characteristics as well. There are 3 theories of emotion, and they're basically like a chicken and egg argument of which happens first. There are 3 variables that go into this. One is physiological arousal, which is like you start sweating, your heart starts beating faster, all those physiological aspects of emotion. 2 is behaviors that you do, like you react to the arousal or you run away or whatever you end up doing. And 3 is the thinking of why is this happening, or why is my heart beating fast, that kind of thing. And then three theories of emotion. James Lang says, and they basically say which happens first. If we were in class, I'd ask you which one happens first or which one, and then we'd come up with some theory of our own, and then we'd learn about these. But we're not going to do that. So James Lang says physiological arousal happens, then emotion. So it is one, then emotion. So your heart starts beating fast, then you get scared. Cannon-Bard says that it happens at the same time. So let's use the example of like you're getting mugged. So you're walking at 2 a.m. in an alleyway and someone puts a gun to your back and says, "Give me all your money." In all three cases, you're going to be scared. But it's just asking, why are you scared and what happens first? James Lang says, your heart starts beating fast, then you feel scared. James Lang. Cannon-Bard, your heart starts beating fast and you're scared at the exact same time. The Schachter two-factor, which is one of the most fun words to say in this class, Schachter two-factor theory is, he says it is a physiological arousal, so your heart starts beating fast. Then you think, why is my heart beating fast? You realize, well, it's because I'm being mugged. That's not good. And then you get scared. And this could happen differently if you're on a roller coaster, which, by the way, you could have the exact same physiological arousal happen. So you're getting mugged, or you're on a roller coaster about to drop. Your heart starts beating fast, you start sweating. But in both cases, the what is it, the cognitive appraisal, is very different. So if you're getting mugged, you think, why is my heart beating fast? This is bad. I'm being mugged. I might die. And that has a negative emotion. But if you're on a roller coaster, you say, this is good. I'm with my friends. I paid for this. Then it'd be a positive emotion. Polygraph. The way polygraphs work is, if you don't know about polygraphs, you'd think it works with heart rate, and they can measure heart rate, but mostly it works with what's called galvanic skin response. It basically measures your sweating, how electrically conductive your skin is, because the more you sweat, the more conductive your skin would become. I have a note here to myself, say show picture, but that's it. And it's actually fairly easy if you don't have any training. Polygraphs are not, they're somewhat accurate, but they can be easily faked, and they can give false positives or false negatives. There's a few, you can look up YouTube videos on how to fake a polygraph. A lot of it has to do with like tightening your muscles, which can give a, I guess, false negative. You can lie, but tense all of your muscles, and then it'll still, I don't know. Anyway, if you're in the market to need to fake a polygraph, that's what you can do. Arousal and performance is the optimal amount of arousal for a task. So how much do you want to be hyped up on caffeine to do various tasks? And there's kind of three answers. If it's an easy task, generally speaking, you want high arousal. If it's a difficult task, you want low arousal. So if you're bored, and if you're doing the late shift, like a late watch shift for a warehouse, and probably nothing's going to happen, you might want to drink those Red Bulls to get higher arousal. Otherwise, it's going to be really boring. But if you're doing like surgery, yeah, you don't want to be tired, but you also don't want to like be hyped up on caffeine and shaking. You want lower arousal because that's already cognitively engaging. But generally speaking, moderate arousal is best. And that's that. Catharsis is emotional release. So that's if you take your anger out on punching a pillow or scream into a pillow. Anything where you're releasing your emotion like that. You'd think that catharsis would make you less angry or less violent afterwards. That would be a just intuitive, you'd think that would happen, but studies have shown that it actually can aggravate or escalate your emotions to do something like that. Feel good, do good phenomenon is pretty much like it sounds. When you are in a good mood, you tend to do more good things. So if you are depressed, you are less likely to do nice things for other people. And if you are in a bad mood, you are more likely to be mean to other people. And here I wrote tendency to be helpful when in a good mood. And that's pretty much it. So the next videos are going to be me with longer hair from like a couple months ago. So we're just going to go over these terms, which is the rest of Unit 8, Motivation and Emotion, and then we're going to start on Unit 10, which is Personality. In personality, all we're going to talk about today is Freud and psychoanalysis, which actually ends up being a decent percentage of the entire unit. For the Unit 8 stuff, I'm just going to kind of walk through the terms that we have left, because we just kind of have a hodgepodge left. And for 10, I'll just talk a lot about Freud, and then I'll look at the terms to make sure we didn't miss anything. But let's just walk through it. So spillover effect, and all these terms you could potentially be on the quiz, but spillover effect is, it says that if you're doing something or watching something, you tend to attribute the physiological feelings you have to the person that you're with. So if it's essentially like a good dating technique, is if you want to go on a date with someone, and it might be a good idea to do something that is physiologically stimulating, because then the person will, their heartbeat increases and they feel all that physiological effects, and then they attribute that to the other person. So if you go on a roller coaster, your heartbeat starts increasing, and just psychologically we tend to associate that with the person that we're with. And I guess you could go the negative way too. If you're having a bad time, you tend to associate that with the person you're with. We already did phobia. Phobia was in one of the other units, but it's still here. So it is an irrational fear. Rational is a key word, because a fear is not necessarily a phobia, but an irrational fear is. Catharsis is venting anger through aggressive behavior. They have done some studies that it's one of the things that's a little bit counterintuitive with psychology. Catharsis, you'd think that if you scream or punch a wall or scream into a pillow or punch your steering wheel, anything like that, that's all catharsis. It's venting your emotion into something physical. Studies have shown, you'd think that that would actually decrease your aggression, but studies have shown that that increases your aggression. I think we watched, I'll just do the old Google here. I think we watched this in the learning unit, but this sort of shows that direction. So there was the Bobo doll experiment where Albert Bandura, back in, I don't know what year it was, 70s, somewhere in there, he had kids watch an adult do one of two different things. Either they would play nicely, here it is, well, either they would play nicely with the Bobo doll, which is the little clown doll with the weight at the bottom, or they would play mean with the Bobo doll, so they'd hit it with hammers and things like that. And according to the intuitive catharsis model, if you watch the adult be violent, it should purge your own violent impulses, but of course the kid went in and basically did what the adult did. So if they watched something violent, they did something violent themselves, which sort of makes sense. Feel good, do good is also pretty intuitive. Feel good, do good just says you tend to do good things when in a good mood, and you tend to do bad things when you're in a bad mood. So just something funny about humans is when we're in a really good mood, we tend to be nicer to other people, and we're in a bad mood, we're meaner to other people. That makes sense. Adaptation level phenomenon and relative deprivation are kind of similar. Adaptation level phenomenon is we tend to judge our own experiences based on what we've dealt with before. So it's part of why, if you go through life, if your first job, you get out of college, you get paid $25,000 a year, and then you get a raise to, I don't know, $30,000 a year, that feels awesome. Then you get another raise and it's $40,000 a year, that's great. And you keep getting raises, that feels a lot better than if you started out at like $90,000 a year and just stayed constant, even though it's more money, because of things like the adaptation level phenomenon. Because we judge, we like feeling progress, and we like, well, you don't care about your lawn, but if my lawn looks better and better every year, that feels good. So we judge against our own experiences. Relative deprivation is more about other people. So that is, you tend to judge your own experiences against others' experiences. That's kind of like the grass is always greener effect. It's also, I'm thinking coronavirus kind of relates to this in a sense that, in a way, it almost makes it better. If it was, and maybe you'll disagree, I don't know, but from my mind, and I need to be careful about how I phrase this, but in my mind, it almost makes it better that the whole world is going through this. If it was just Oklahoma that went through a tornado or something, and because of the tornado we were out of school, that would feel really isolated. Or if it was just you that got hit by a tornado and you were in this sort of situation that we're in right now, that would feel like a woe is me kind of a thing. You'd feel really sorry for yourself, but it's literally the whole world, which kind of makes you feel better about things. Or maybe you disagree, I don't know, but if you make a lot of money but all your friends make more money, you feel poor. If you make the same amount of money but your friends make less money, you feel rich. It's all relative to other people. General adaptation syndrome, and then personality types. Then we get to move on to Freud. So general adaptation syndrome says in stressors, which also relates to coronavirus, we go through 3 stages according to this theory: the alarm stage, resistance stage, and exhaustion stage. Alarm stage is the fight or flight. So that's you hear about coronavirus the first time, and then all the hormones go into your body, and you start feeling anxiety, and you go to below level of functioning, and then according to this theory at least, after that you'll enter resistance, which is hormones enter your body to make you actually perform better than when you were initially in alarm stage, to kind of be able to focus and possibly solve the problem. Also, your body's sort of healing itself from the stressors. If you can escape the general adaptation syndrome at that point, that's good. But if not, you'll go into exhaustion, which is where your body's hormones are depleted, and so you can't have that heightened sense of awareness anymore, and so then you enter exhaustion. So that would be like depression, fatigue, anxiety, things like that. So alarm is the fight or flight initial response. Resistance is you have hormones that are kind of giving you a heightened something physiological, and then exhaustion is if you don't get out of it, then you'll enter exhaustion where you just give up. Sort of two personality types. Let me get to talking about Freud. And you've probably heard these before. You're like, I'm a really type A person. I'm not. I feel like I'm more of a type B, but I guess you'd be better to say which one of those I am. But type A is more very driven and motivated, aggressive, like to be in charge. And type B would be much more relaxed, easygoing, go with the flow kind of person. So that's that. And that's all in Unit 8. So I think we've gone over now all this stuff. The assignment for today is going to be over the next unit, which is, I don't even want to look at it. We're just going to open up Paint, and I'm going to start talking about Freud. Let's use the old, it's a little bit scary to type this into. Hopefully I don't have to edit something out here, because he was definitely a controversial person. Great, so here's Freud. Freud, the cigar is perfect. Freud, at the turn of the 1900s, so the turn of the 20th century, going into the 20th century, he became famous, and he was the first kind of celebrity psychologist. He started what he called psychoanalysis or psychoanalytic theory, and the bulk of his theory was about the unconscious. So this is going to look even worse than it usually does, but I didn't want it thicker than perfect. An iceberg. He made a metaphor like an iceberg. He said that our mind is like an iceberg. Whoops. Where an actual iceberg, most of an iceberg is actually underwater. That's just because ice is slightly less dense than water, so it floats, but most of an iceberg, the part that you can see is minority of the iceberg, and most of it is actually underwater. And he said our brains are like that. So he said that our brains are mostly under consciousness. The part that you can see he called was the conscious part of the mind, and then right below the surface he called it the pre-conscious, and then below that, way under the surface, which he said was the most important part, is the unconscious. He never used the word subconscious, but since him it's been collectively referred to as all that stuff that's under the water. But Freud said our minds are like that. So the part, conscious thoughts are what you're actually thinking right now. Like consciously, I'm thinking that I really like Microsoft Paint. It's a great tool. And I'm thinking, I don't know, that my green screen actually looks pretty good today. I'm not fuzzy. All the things that are actually going through your head, like maybe you're hungry or whatever you're literally thinking about and you're aware that you're thinking about right now. Preconscious thoughts are what you could be thinking about, you could be aware of, but you're not currently thinking about, so you could bring the preconscious into the conscious. And then unconscious, or what he said was the most important part of your brain, but you don't even have access to it. It is literally hidden from your thought, but he said it was the most important thing, driving the most of what we do and what we think. It should be noted that Freud didn't make most of his ideas based on science. He just kind of he used like introspection in himself. He thought deep in his own mind, and based on what he was thinking about his own mind, he kind of extrapolated that to everybody. So it was not scientifically derived, but he's still probably, unfortunately, the most famous person in psychology. But we learn about him because a lot of what he did do a lot of good things. One of the good things he did was, before Freud, when someone was crazy or when someone had a psychological disorder, you would actually physically do things to them, like you'd lock them up, you'd put leeches on them to drain their crazy blood out of their body, you'd chain them to a wall so they couldn't get their crazy on other people or whatever. But Freud was one of the first people to actually introduce talk therapy, which sounds kind of crazy that you wouldn't have done that before, but Freud actually talked to people, tried to talk the crazy out of them, so to speak, whether that's whatever it is, schizophrenia or anxiety, whatever. So he started sort of counseling. He had a lot of bad stuff. He smoked cigars. He got mouth cancer from cigars, so he had to take his jaw in and out of his mouth multiple times a day, which he said was very painful. He used a lot of cocaine, which undoubtedly affected how he thought, and was very violent, and sex had a lot to do with a lot of his theories as well, but which is important to talk about. Let's see. All right, another part of his theory was the id, the ego, and the superego. Let's make that a little bigger. He said that all of our, well, I guess I should say what they are first. So the id is, it's kind of three parts of the, what was that movie? Emperor's New Groove? I think. Was that the one with the angel? Yes, it is. Perfect. Okay. I don't think I've ever actually seen this movie, but I just know that it's the one with the angel and the devil. So in this, and probably a lot of cartoons, but in this movie, there's a little devil that pops up and an angel that pops up. That's a perfect analogy for the id, the ego, and the superego. The id, according to Freud, is our bad instincts. It's the first impulse that comes into your mind when something happens, like, well, I could do that. It's the devil that's saying, well, you could do the bad thing. You could cheat on that test. You could cheat on your significant other. You could kill that person. You could cheat on your taxes. Anything like that that would be immoral but might benefit you in some way. The superego is the good one. Superego is like, what would Jesus do in the situation? It's the ideal. It makes you feel guilty for not doing the right thing, according to Freud, and it's the one that says, it tells you to do the right thing. So if you're in a test and you haven't studied, just take the test anyway, apologize to the teacher. Or like, if someone wrongs you, maybe you should just pray for them, that kind of thing. It may not even be, neither of these sides might even be realistic. They're kind of the extremes of either side. And then the ego is you in the middle that's listening to both of these and deciding what to actually do. The ego is called the reality principle. There it is. So id is the bad one, the devil. Ego is the reality. And the superego is the do-good principle. I don't know, for lack of a better word. Freud said all the conflict that we have is because of the conflict between, all the anxiety that we have is because of the conflict between the id and the superego. The id is wanting to do the wrong thing, and the superego is wanting to do the right thing, or at least feeling guilty for not doing the right thing, and it's the conflict between those two that creates our anxieties, at least according to Sigmund Freud. And he came up with defense mechanisms, which are the way that we combat these anxieties, according to him, and we're going to go over them. Actually, your assignment, there's going to be some other small things that we'll cover after this, but your assignment is going to be about these defense mechanisms. I'll have a little worksheet for you about these. So here's what they are, and you can reference the Quizlet to answer the questions on the worksheet or the Google Drive form. And they are repression, regression, reaction formation, projection, rationalization, displacement, sublimation, and denial. We'll just start at the top here. Repression, and I'll go over some of the other ones that are above that as well. Repression is blocking out the traumatic things. So actually, a lot of people since Freud have said repression really doesn't happen as much as Freud thought that it did. In movies, repression happens a lot. Like if you get mugged in a movie, you might, like once the police talk to you, you completely block it out of memory and you wouldn't even remember that it happened. That would be repression. Or if something really bad happened, your significant other breaks up with you, someone dies, whatever, you just like completely block it out of memory, it's gone. And that's repression. Regression, I guess let me skip around here to denial. Denial is similar to repression, but repression is completely blocking it out. Denial is you know that it happened, but you refuse to accept it. Denial's more kind of delusional. Projection or repression, you don't even have access to it. It's just gone. Denial would be like if your girlfriend broke up with you and someone said, dude, I'm so sorry your girlfriend broke up with you. That's terrible. And you said, no, she still loves me. She loves me. She'll be back. That would be denial. Or like, just is refusing to accept reality. I don't know, that's exactly what I said in my example there. Regression is going back to an earlier stage in development. So that is if you start to get anxious and you start sucking your thumb or wetting the bed, or just generally like act like a child if you get in a bad situation. Reverting back to an earlier stage of development. Reaction formation is acting opposite the way you actually feel. So that could be if you really like somebody, but you act mean towards them. Maybe you have a crush on somebody, but you don't want them to know that you have a crush on them, so you act mean towards that person. Or if you don't like somebody, but you go out of your way to act super nice to them. You can think of it like overcompensating sort of for something that you think is wrong, but it's acting the opposite the way that you feel. Projection is taking traits about yourself and seeing them in other people. So that would be if you're a selfish person, you really like attention, and you see someone's walking down the hall at McGinnis and they drop their books, and you think like, that person's so selfish. They probably drop their books just to get attention. You're seeing your attention-seeking behavior in other people. Or it could even be a good thing, like if you really always like to do the right thing and you are selfless, and someone does something that seems maybe mean, and you say, well, they probably meant well by him. You might be projecting your own goodness on that other person. Rationalization is making excuses. It's if you fail a test, you say, well, it's because the teacher's bad, or the teacher doesn't like me, or the test wasn't fair. Or if you get fired from your job, it's, well, I mean, I didn't even like the job anyway. It was my boss is out to get me. It's any kind of an excuse to make up for a situation that's bad. Displacement is taking your anger out on something unrelated to what caused the anger in the first place. That would be if something bad, so your girlfriend breaks up with you and you punch a wall. It's like the piñata, emotional piñata. It could be you get fired and, well, just you scream, punch a wall. Let's see. Oh, there you go. Yell at your little brother when you get home. It's taking your anger out on something unrelated. Sublimation is sort of like positive displacement. Sublimation is channeling your negative emotions and doing something positive with them. So that would be if you get, that doesn't really work. If someone dies of cancer that you know, you're sad, but you channel that sadness into starting a foundation for cancer. Or let's see, oh, here we go. Girlfriend breaks up with you, which makes you angry, but you use that anger to, next time you're playing sports, you try even harder because you use that as fuel for sports. So that would be sublimation. Channeling unhealthy energy into something that's productive. Denial, like I said earlier, is refusal to accept reality. Let's clean up some of these other terms, and then I think we'll be pretty much done with Freud. Let's see. A lot of his are very PG-13 related. So there's iceberg, conscious, preconscious, unconscious, went over already. Id, ego, superego. All right, these are fun words, right? So he has these stages of development. Let me zoom in a little bit here. A lot of people have stages of development. He, being Freud, has the psychosexual stages of childhood development, if you can imagine it. It sounds really provocative at first, and it kind of is, but these sort of make sense when you think about it. It has to do with developmental stages. Oral is when you're breastfeeding, and then anal potty training, phallic, latent, and genital. All you need to know is just don't worry about the ages, but do know the order that they come in, and you'll need to know about fixations. According to Freud, you could get fixated on a stage. You've probably heard the word, that person's really anal about something. And if you've heard that, you all know what it means. It means someone's really uptight, or someone like really likes things to be ordered and is meticulous. And he says you can have a fixation on a stage, and then in adulthood, that shows it according to Freud, and Freud was crazy, and you can take what he says with a grain of salt. But if you have a fixation in the anal stage of development, then actually, oddly enough, you can have two, it's one of the stages you can have two different fixations. You can be anal retentive, which when someone says that person is really anal about things, that would be what they mean by that probably, or anal expulsive, which is a fantastic visual, isn't it? But it's two things according to Freud in potty training, where anal retentive, according to Freud, I feel like I have to say that over and over, is anal retentive would be children during potty training that get pleasure in holding it in, or see that as a sense of control, and then that manifests itself later on in being very orderly. And anal expulsive is the other way, and that would be people that are very disorganized and have messy rooms and flourish under less organization. Here, I guess it's explained here. So I think that's pretty much it. Okay. Yeah, we'll go over projective test tomorrow. It's too much for today already. So that is all we're going to do for today after we clean up these next terms. Freud said he was very deterministic. He said by the time you're 6 years old, your personality is set in stone effectively, so you can't change. After Freud, they rejected a lot of what he said, and they said that's ridiculous. As I think a lot of you and me would agree that you can change after you're 6, but he said by the time you're 6, if you're a punk 6-year-old, you're going to be a punk adult, or whatever. But pretty much, he said childhood is extremely important, and a lot of what he would do in therapy would be to go back to your childhood and try and uncover the traumas, which he would say were in your unconscious. Branch of people called Neo-Freudians, and those were the people that came after Freud, that believed mostly in what Freud said, but didn't buy into the whole thing, and different people didn't believe different parts of what Freud said. They mostly bought into the whole conscious, unconscious, pre-conscious thing, which is the iceberg metaphor. Of that unconscious is the stuff below the surface that you don't even have access to, and that's the most important part. That's the core of Freudian thought. And so your past, uncovering your past, is the most important part of Freud's theory. The Neo-Freudians believed that, but they kind of rejected individual other parts of what he said. Carl Jung, who is this guy, he was after Freud. He believed in most of what Freud said, but he did not believe in, I don't think we've talked about it yet, but the Oedipus complex. Oedipus complex was something that Freud believed in. He said that boys have an attraction to their mothers. He, again, not scientific, he just kind of, apparently he liked his mom, and so he thought that everybody else did too. Named after the play Oedipus Rex, where a prince accidentally marries his mom in a faraway land, finds out that it's mom, and then gouges his eyes out. So he named it the Oedipus complex. Anyway, Jung said, nah, there's no way that's true. I definitely don't like my mom. And so he rejected the Oedipus complex, but he came up with the collective unconscious, which is also, the whole Freudian, everything relating to Freud is pretty mystical and out there, not really scientific, but it's still important to learn about today. The collective unconscious is Jung's thought that not only is there an unconscious for an individual person, but there's also an unconscious for like groups of people. So our nation has one collective unconscious, which is sort of like this set of unknown beliefs that we all come loaded with in America, or even the AP Psych Spring 2020 class would have one collective unconscious made up of all of our experiences, and then we all, based on those experiences, have these unconscious thoughts that are in common with all these people. So he called that the collective unconscious. Projective tests. So projective tests, since Freud said that the unconscious was the most important part of your personality, that presents a problem, because by definition with the unconscious, you don't know what it is. And if it's the most important thing, then you have to find a way to uncover it. And that becomes the purpose of projective tests, which are the thematic apperception test is a projective test, the Rorschach's a projective test, free association, dream interpretation, they're all projective tests, they're ambiguous tests where you can answer multiple different ways. There's not really a right answer, and it's designed to project your unconscious onto the test. One of them is the thematic apperception test. And let's start with the Rorschach. The Rorschach, named after the guy that made one of the first versions of it. I forget his first name, but last name was Rorschach, and it is this. So a therapist will hold, and by the way, these are the actual Rorschach inkblot tests that are used still, these actual inkblots. But they'll hold up a card like this big, and they'll say basically, what do you see here? And anything you say matters. Like if you say, I see a bat here, or I see a mask, or I see whatever. If you ask to rotate the card, they would write that down. If you comment on texture instead of overall picture, they'd write that down. If you say lots of things, they'd write that down. Even if you say, I don't see anything, they'd write that down. Everything means something. Same thing with dream analysis. They dive so deep into meaning, where arguably they're probably finding meaning in things that have no meaning, but I'm not a Freudian, so. But you're trying to look for overall themes of like, well, I see blood. If you see blood, then maybe you're projecting some sort of a violent past, or you're projecting some fear or anxieties or something like that. So you go through all these, and then they would ask you what you see, and you'd say what you see, and then they make their analysis off that. That's the Rorschach test. It's a shame we don't have class, because we spend a lot of time in class going over these, but it doesn't really make sense over a video like this. I like to keep the videos short and concise if possible. The thematic apperception test, very similar, but instead of an inkblot, it's two people in an ambiguous situation. So your purpose here is to say what these people were doing before this, what they're currently doing, what they're going to do, and what they're thinking or feeling right now. Like, for instance, I'll just put myself out there. For this one, you could say it's two scientists, but more important than that, but what are they doing? And are these peers? Is this a teacher and this is a student? How is she feeling? For me, it seems like this is the student, this is the teacher, and she is judging the student, and the student's very anxious. And there's no reason that has to be the case. That's me sort of projecting my own, I guess, anxieties or sense of inadequacy or something like that. That's what a Freudian would say. That in this ambiguous situation, I'm seeing that this person is anxious and feels inferior, so that might be what I'm thinking in my unconscious. So that's the thematic apperception test. Rorschach is inkblot. Thematic apperception test, two people in an ambiguous situation. Free association is if you see a movie where there's like the red leather couch, that's the free association. The point of free association is there's a therapist, he says just start talking, and the theory is that eventually you'll talk about what's bothering you. So you say, the therapist says start talking, you say, what do you want to talk about? He says, I don't know, just start talking and see where it leads. And then you start talking, and then maybe eventually you're talking about when you were 7 and your dad didn't love you or something like that. But that's the point of free association, is if you talk long enough and just keep talking, then eventually you will talk about important things that would reveal your unconscious. Dream interpretation. Freud got famous in the first place for writing his book, The Interpretation of Dreams, at the turn of the 1900s, which would be the 20th century. That's what made him famous in the first place. But he went real deep with dreams and the meaning of dreams, where each individual thing in a dream has a meaning. Some people believe that, some people don't. I tend to think that maybe general themes of dreams can have meanings, but like Freud would say, if your teeth fall out in a dream, it means this specific thing. If you're falling in a dream, it means this specific thing. If you're climbing a ladder, it means this specific thing. And his book was just a list of thousands of scenarios that and what their meaning was. Oedipus complex, which we talked about, Freud said that boys have an attraction to their mothers. Collective unconscious, was that up here also? It was, it's in there twice. All right. Myers, okay, so now we're getting away from, let me see if there's any more Freud before we kill Freud. No, well, sort of. The electric complex is the the complement to the Oedipus complex, where girls have an attraction to their fathers. Anyway, it's important to learn about because they're theories, but just know that it's not scientific, and there's a lot of people that think Freud did a little bit too much cocaine. Myers, okay, so now we're moving on to personality test. Myers-Briggs is, I'll provide a link so you can take a free version of the Myers-Briggs. There's a one from Human Metrics that's pretty good. This one. You can go through and enter all these, and it'll give you your Myers-Briggs. Myers-Briggs types is the test that probably most of you have taken, and there are 16 possible types. Your first letter can either be I or E for introvert or extrovert, then S or N, or is your second letter F or T for your third letter, and then J or P for your fourth letter. And it breaks down these different personalities types. It's probably, or at least used to be, the most widely used personality test. There were a lot of problems with it in terms of it did not use scientific methods for its creation. They just kind of wrote questions, and so its validity is in question, but it is still the most widely used test. The MMPI is not a personality test, it's a psychopathology test. And there used to be a really nice free version online, and that has been since removed because the people want to charge you money to take it. But let me see if I can find an answer sheet here, and I'll show you what kind of things it... Great. Okay, so it's this enormous... I used to have access to a question sheet. It was like 700 questions long. But instead of introvert or extrovert or whatever, it gives you psychopathology ratings. So here's hypochondriasis, which is a oversensitivity to being sick, depression, hysteria, psychopathic deviance, masculinity, femininity, paranoia, psychoasthenia, schizophrenia, hypomania, social introversion. It goes on and on. There's more than that, but it's a psychopathology test. So that's not a personality test. Then there is the Big Five personality test, and the acronym for that is CANOE. So remember CANOE. And whereas the Myers-Briggs is 4 letters, this is 5, and it's conscientiousness, agreeableness, neuroticism, openness to experience, and extroversion. So those are the tests that we learn about in this class, and you can kind of, at least for the Big Five and the Myers-Briggs, pretty easy to find free tests online. So not many terms left, and then I'll send out the quiz and you take the quiz. The locus of control test, which we actually, funny enough, just talked about yesterday in sociology, but locus of control, there's another free test for that, which is really interesting. I'll send this out as well. It's the first one that comes up. And you answer these questions, and then it'll give you a score out of 13. So let me just do the top response for everything here. And then it will pop out a number between 0 and 13. Locus of control, which, by the way, you should do this test. It doesn't take you long. The lower the score is, the more internal your locus. I haven't explained what it is yet, but a low score is internal, high score is external. I think probably in class the highest scores I've ever seen were like 11, and the lowest scores I've ever seen were maybe 2. And a lot of people get in the 6-7 range, which would be kind of in the middle. But what locus of control is it is whether you think that what happens to you is because of luck on the external side, or if it's because of your own actions, which would be on the internal side. So if you believe these would be internal things to believe. Like, good things happen to good people for the most part. Bad things happen to bad people. If you try hard in life, generally speaking, you will succeed. If you're nice to people, you'll have friends. If you try hard at McGinnis, you'll get good grades. If you get good grades, you'll get into a good college. If you try hard in college, you'll get a good job, things like that. If you believe those things, then you probably have an internal locus of control. External locus of control would be saying things like, I believe sometimes just stuff happens. You can have bad luck. The most important thing to getting a job is knowing the right people. Sometimes I study for a quiz really hard and I fail. Sometimes I don't study at all and I get 100 on a quiz. Just more saying luck or fate are the main driving forces of what happens to you. That would be external locus of control. And last term, spotlight effect, and then we're done. Spotlight effect is you tend to think that people are paying more attention to you than you are. Like, the example I always give is right now my hair's pretty long, but whenever I used to get a haircut in college, I'd go get my haircut and then I'd walk around the mall where I got my haircut, and I'd feel really self-conscious because I feel like people were looking at me because I felt different about my hair.
but in reality, no one even knows who I am. So of course, no one cares what my hair looks like because they didn't know what it was before. But the spotlight effect, you feel like people are watching you a lot more than you are, and that's the